Freaknik began in Atlanta in March 1983 as a relatively small picnic featuring sandwiches, coolers, and boom boxes for HBCU students in the Atlanta University Center during spring break. When a bunch of members from the DC Metro Club were bored and stuck on campus, they threw the first picnic in Piedmont Park. The name for Freaknik was inspired by two songs, Freak by Chic and Freak of the Week by Funkadelic, with a student named Rico Brown saying, "Let's call it Freaknik." Shout out to Rico Brown. The money made from the first Freaknik went to local charities. Due to a lack of social media and publicity, the early days of the picnic saw mostly college attendees who had heard about the event from word of mouth. Throughout the rest of the 80s, they gathered in various parks and brought their grills, blankets, boom boxes, and food with them, and eventually things got a little more rowdy. Said one attendee, "I remember me and 3 of my homeboys with me driving down I-85, approaching the baseball stadium, and some girls from North Carolina were honking their horn trying to get us to pull over. We pulled over at a gas station, exchanged numbers, and ended up hooking up that night. It was a wild time." This was certainly one of the main draws of Freaknik, but it wasn't the only one. By the 90s, the weekend event served up basketball tournaments, a job fair, and musical performances. Plus, networking was a key feature of Freaknik. Think about it. This is pre-internet. Where else would you meet a bunch of other black college students in one place? If I would have been at Ohio State in the 90s, you best believe I would have drove my ass from Columbus down to Atlanta faithfully every year. Freaknik was bringing in millions of dollars to Atlanta annually. It was becoming an event where new black artists could come and show off their music at parties, and hopeful entrepreneurs could throw parties and sell merch. Freaknik was all about turning up, getting loose, and being seen, and letting off some steam too. In addition to Uncle Luke's 1993 music video, Work It Out, which featured Freaknik, the shift from park area parties to car cruising really put the event on the map. First, there were over 100,000 attendees. No event had ever brought together so many young black people for nothing but fun. No marching or with pain in mind, just fun. However, all that fun in the streets led to a gridlock that blocked the area from Piedmont Park to Peachtree Street to the West End, blocking people from leaving their homes and stopping businesses from operating. City Council member and mayoral candidate Bill Campbell defended Freaknik, saying that the event just needed to be ironed out with better policing and planning rather than being banned. He and others looked at it as a test run for hosting the Olympics in 1996. Meanwhile, business owners and civic leaders tried to throw alternate events like the Atlanta Black College Spring Break Celebration and Freakfest 94, but both failed. In preparation for the real deal Freaknik 94, the City Council approved $175,000 for security and cleanup and hoped for the best. Atlanta residents, meanwhile, weighed in with the Atlanta Constitution. While a white man said there was no need for Freaknik and a white woman cried that even though she stood for civil rights, she was told to move out of the way, white bitch, by a partygoer, an astute reader said, "The same residents who complained about the Freaknik parties are the ones who will continually complain about the traffic and parking problems that are associated with other events held in Piedmont Park. I have one question for them. Why did you move to Midtown near Piedmont Park?" Said another reader, "Perhaps had the students been blonde, blue-eyed, Ivy League types, Freaknik would have been perceived for what it was, just another college romp." Freaknik 1994 was scheduled to have performances by artists like Snoop Dogg and Queen Latifah. I know my mama was mad she couldn't go because she just had me. It's no surprise that over 200,000 people showed up. Not my mama though. This generated $80 million in revenue for the city of Atlanta. Not everybody was pleased. Said a Clark Atlanta University student, "Having fun isn't just being a freak." This is another example of Freaknik being representative of larger social conversations happening among black people in the 90s, particularly about hip-hop. There were intense debates about the growing misogyny and violence in hip-hop, best exemplified by the activism of C. Dolores Tucker. Freaknik was caught up in this discourse because artists like Diddy, Jermaine Dupri, Outkast, and others went to local events, blasted their music, and did guerrilla marketing. Local clubs held concerts featuring hip-hop. And while there were certainly valid criticisms of hip-hop's misogyny as well as sexual assaults at Freaknik, conservative black Americans completely rejected any notion of sexual positivity that prioritizes consent. Sexuality isn't negative, but black college students were being held to a standard that many white college students were not, to revoke stereotypes that black people are lascivious and poorly behaved. They were expected to be better than the stereotypes and white students, said future Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed. A 1991 Howard grad who attended the early Freakniks, I think that Freaknik was a good thing, until it wasn't, until it lost its essence. It stopped being about black students having a good time and took on an all-star game type of feel. It really became a black Daytona Beach. The Freakniks in 94 and 95 saw an increase in reported rapes, robberies, assaults, and gridlocks. Videos from this era show all kinds of black people, including non-students, doing a bunch of erotic stuff. There's also footage of men debating whether or not consent depended on what women were wearing, and I could not find this video when I was researching it. I had it bookmarked, don't know what happened to it. If I find it, I'll link it in the comments. The months leading up to Freaknik 95 were contentious, as Republicans called for an end to affirmative action, HBCU funding, and other stuff we'll address in Lectual Does the 90s. Freaknik was used as political fodder in the ongoing cultural wars that were growing increasingly partisan. Rumors circulated that the event would be canceled and that the House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who had just come into power, planned to have the American Heritage Foundation record Freaknik 95 so that there was evidence that the black college student is wasting the government's money. Now, that didn't happen, but this is hilarious to me as someone who attended a PWI and has seen how white college students behave, especially at Big Ten schools where football games cause street parties and even riots. I was maced at one, actually. Anyways, in April 1995, several Atlanta area hotels refused to accept reservations from people traveling for Freaknik. Some 600 Atlanta residents, mostly business owners, formed the Freaknik Fallout Group and threatened to initiate a lawsuit against the city if Freaknik was not shut down. Instead, the city put up $1 million for security and cleanup, and according to Atlanta Magazine, implemented an aggressive traffic control plan, blocking highway exits and setting up barricades in popular cruising areas. Still, over 100,000 people showed up. Atlanta Police Chief Beverly Harvard was quoted as being mad as hell that women attending that year's festival had participated in lewd behavior and allowed themselves to be fondled. The Grady Memorial Hospital reported 10 rape victims. The 1996 Freaknik had a huge police presence. Reported the Atlanta Magazine, City Hall solution, strangulation by bureaucracy. In April 1996, Freaknik became a dry run for Olympics traffic control. APD put 1,500 officers on 12-hour shifts, and the city tested its high-tech traffic system. The Georgia Emergency Management Agency opened up its command center, and Georgia National Guard troops drilled at metro area armories. Hundreds of no cruising signs were posted around the city, especially in wealthy areas like Buckhead, meaning a lot of the cruising shifted to Memorial Drive, where a police chief said most partygoers had a good attitude and there were fewer than 5 Freaknik-related arrests. Meanwhile, black students and youth themselves were trying to fix the image of the event. Said the chairperson of the National African Youth Leadership Summit Committee, the locals are the ones who have been in trouble and who have made problems. The group held a hip-hop culture forum called Hip Hop, the Contract on Generation X, an African Youth Day, a voter registration drive, and a block party with a strict atmosphere. Said the chairperson, the event is geared towards college students. If we represent black intelligentsia, we need to stop exploiting women and acting crazy. But many students weren't interested. A Howard student said she wouldn't go to Freaknik because I'm not gonna find a good man down there. In 1997, early Freaknik organizers Sharon Toomer and Suzanne Guy Mitchell submitted a proposal to City Council that outlined a new incarnation of Freaknik, with corporate sponsorships, a website with centralized information including do's and don'ts, and designated cruising and 24-hour party zones. The city said no to everything except for a do's and don'ts website. Freaknik.com got 13 million views between January and April 1997. There are a few reasons why Freaknik 97 was less popping than the ones before. It was in the aftermath of the 1996 Olympics bombing, there was an increased police presence and sanitization, there were anti-cruising ordinances, and a rumor of potential racist violence because the weekend coincided with the anniversary of the Waco siege. So the event wasn't the same, though a bunch of people, including budding rapper Trina, came. The aggressive policing even led to a man named Timmy Sinclair getting beaten and pepper sprayed. A convention held during 1997 Freaknik threatened to never come back, which would cost the city $18 million in revenue a year. So in 1998, a biracial committee studied Freaknik and recommended to the mayor that it be shut down. Freaknik ended up relocating twice to east of Atlanta, attracting much smaller crowds of 50,000 in 1999. With quotas to fill to make the event look extra criminal and to deter future attendees, police arrested 350 people, impounded hundreds of cars, and issued thousands of citations. This strategy worked, and by 2000, black college students were going to southern beaches. Plenty Plenty of events in the years since have tried to recapture the magic of the wonder years of Freaknik, but none have succeeded. While rent parties, juke joints, and hip-hop block parties still occur today, Freaknik is the only type of event in this video that solely exists in memories and academic texts, and like theme parties. It has been studied from various angles including race, gender, cruising culture, sexuality, transportation, consumerism, and even city planning. In 2004, Marion Myers wrote a paper explaining the ways in which the media blamed black women for any sexual assault or harassment they faced at Freaknik. The upcoming Hulu documentary on Freaknik will likely address the ways that Freaknik posed risks to black women. Some people will be angry at the raw recollections of harassment and assault, but those stories need to be told. However, I think it's reductive and insulting to act like Freaknik, which was initially a net positive, was unique in that it lacked clear communication about rape culture and enforcement of consent. This lack of consent existed in the workplace, on college campuses, during white spring breaks, and at bars and event venues everywhere. I say this not to sanction such rape culture, but to emphasize that Freaknik could have evolved and have been made safer if rape culture overall was mitigated and discussed the way it is today. There are plenty of safe music festivals, street fairs, spring break destinations, and block parties featuring nudity, sexual acts, and drinking and drugs. But black partygoers in Atlanta were made out to be inherently worse, criminal, and uncontrollable. This brings me to my last point. It's important to not strip away the willful expressions of sexuality by women at Freaknik. Yes, there were black women who were consensually flashing body parts for cash or attention, like vintage shake dancers and modern day strippers, or the way people do at Mardi Gras and Folsom Street Fair. Like they film literal porn at Folsom Street Fair. They found a way to make it safe there. Why couldn't we make Freaknik safer? But maybe Freaknik was meant to be left in the 90s. Said Freak Like Me singer Adina Howard, Freaknik was about freedom. It was about just doing you and not being judged at all. Freaknik was the first time black celebrations of joy and hedonism were thrust into a national spotlight, in defiance of respectability politics and expectations of religious morality. But it was just a continuation of other partying. I know I said we'd be discussing 4 types of black parties in this video, but here's a bonus. As pointed out by historian Stephanie M.H. Camp in The Pleasures of Resistance, Enslaved Women and Body Politics in the Plantation South, deep in the woods, away from slaveholding eyes, they held secret parties where they amused themselves dancing, performing music, drinking alcohol, and courting. She detailed how women at outlaw slave parties made special outfits, did up their appearances, and celebrated with their male counterparts in a secular space of music and resistance, at great risk of whippings or worse punishments from roaming slave patrols. Enslaved people would even squirrel away food and drink from their enslavers to prepare for the festivities, where they cultivated dances that would become integral to 20th century dance and popular culture. When chided by other enslaved people who were more religious and disapproved, it did no good. Said one Jefferson Henry, they would go off to dances and stay out all night. You couldn't talk to folks that tried to get by with things like that. They weren't going to do no different no-how. Like the other parties we've explored in this video, these clandestine antebellum parties weren't attended by everybody, but they add another shade of variation to the black experience and prove that nothing is new. And this is what modern black youth and 20-somethings point to when they're judged for letting loose on camera in the modern social media era. People's parents were at Freaknik doing the same shit they were, with a lot less expectations of bodily autonomy and respect. And remember Rose from that rent party invitation? You can wake up the devil, raise all the hell, no one will be there to go home and tell. They were also at juke joints and rent parties and buffet flats, similarly doing the same shit as Freaknik attendees, with no cameras and a lot less judgment. Now we have open conversations about rape culture and higher expectations to respect boundaries, but with cameras and much more judgment.